It, it, it cost me a lot in the music business because of my lifestyle and because of, um, you know, there's a lot of people that there was a lot of resistance to my records, a lot of resistance to me, because of my lifestyle.
At 85, most men's lives settle into a quiet, predictable rhythm, but David Allan Coe was never, ever like most men. He was the outlaw Nashville couldn't break, the songwriter who refused to sugarcoat his brutal truths, and the prisoner who forged his scars into anthems. Now, after decades of what felt like silence, his voice has erupted, and the story he's telling, it's about so much more than music. It's a story of devastating betrayal, of erasure, and of a final, explosive revenge against the very institution that tried to bury his name forever. His childhood was shattered before it even began. David Allan Coe was born on September 6, 1939, in Akron, Ohio, a city known more for rubber and smokestacks than for birthing country legends. His beginnings were anything but hopeful. By the tender age of 9, he was already locked away in reform school. What followed was a brutal, repeating cycle of confinement, juvenile homes, more reformatories, and then full-blown prisons. To the outside world, he was just another statistic, another troubled kid. But for Coe, those walls forged his defiance. Life never gave him a soft place to land. His father remarried, and his stepmother's message was icy and clear. He was not wanted. The rejection was a devastating blow. She kept his sister but demanded he be turned over to the courts. From that moment on, Coe's world wasn't about being raised, it was about surviving. At the Star Commonwealth for Boys in Albion, Michigan, he was beaten with paddles until his hands bled. He ran away, stole cars, was caught, and then thrown even deeper into the system. Yet, behind those closed doors, something else was stirring. Inmates knew him as the one who could sing. He started winning talent shows inside the prison, the same way Elvis won over audiences on the outside. Behind bars, he began to write songs that were raw, unfiltered, and drenched in a brutal pain. Later, he would call them his prison gospel, verses born not from Nashville's polished sheen, but from the desperation and rhythm of a concrete cell. He even made the shocking claim he'd spent time on death row for killing an inmate who tried to assault him, though that story has always been disputed. But what cannot be denied is that prison carved him into a man unlike any Nashville had ever seen. By the time he was released in the 1960s, he wasn't just another ex-con. He was a storm carrying a guitar, a notebook filled with explosive lyrics, and a permanent grudge against authority. He was breaking into Nashville, and the outlaw was about to rise. When David Allan Coe stormed into Nashville in the late 1960s, he didn't come looking for permission or approval. He drove a hearse. He parked it right outside the Ryman Auditorium, and he lived out of it. To the music industry, he was just another drifter on the fringe, but he refused to be dismissed. He stalked the alleys of Music Row, guitar in hand, daring anyone to look away. It didn't take long before his words forced everyone to notice. The year was 1973. Tanya Tucker recorded "Would You Lay With Me" in a Field of Stone, a ballad so haunting, so intimate, and so raw that it shot straight to #1. Suddenly, the industry had to confront the man who wrote it. But what they saw absolutely terrified them. Coe wasn't some polished cowboy in clean boots. He was covered in tattoos, with long, wild hair, unpredictable and completely unwilling to play their game. While Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson were celebrated for just testing the boundaries of country music, Coe had already shattered them, writing songs that pushed into a stunning new territory that Nashville didn't dare touch. His early records, Penitentiary Blues in 1969 and later Requiem for a Harlequin, were unlike anything else on the airwaves. They were psychedelic, violent, sometimes deeply disturbing, but they were his undeniable truth. And that raw truth? It resonated deep. Bikers, ex-cons, misfits, and wanderers didn't just buy his albums, they stormed his shows. To them, he wasn't just some performer on a stage. No, they saw a reflection of themselves. Coe wasn't selling entertainment. He was giving them validation, proof that someone finally dared to sing about the life they actually lived. But Nashville wanted stars they could polish, package, and ultimately control. Coe shattered every single one of those boxes. He mocked the industry, donning rhinestone suits and a Lone Ranger mask, and calling himself the mysterious Rhinestone Cowboy. While others begged for a shot at the Grand Ole Opry, he confronted it with long-haired redneck in 1976, and "You never even called me by my name." That latter song, co-written with Steve Goodman, was a stunning jab. Coe mocked the very rules of country songwriting, revealing its formulas while making his fans laugh and sing along. It was pure rebellion set to a three-chord progression, and while Jennings, Nelson, and Chris Christopherson earned their spots on magazine covers and the sacred Opry stage, Coe was out there carving his own separate kingdom. He didn't need their spotlight. He had already ignited his own fire. The Blacklist, a silent erasure by the Opry. You have to understand, for most country musicians, an invitation to the Grand Ole Opry, that was the Holy Grail. It was the sacred stage that turned singers into legends. It was the ultimate validation, the sign that Nashville had finally welcomed you into its inner circle. But for David Allan Coe, that door wasn't just closed. It was bolted shut from the very beginning. In over 60 years of performing, he was never once invited to stand in that famous circle, not as a guest, not as a member, not for a single, solitary song. Officially, no one ever said why. But behind closed doors, the whispers grew into a roar as the years passed. Some pointed to his prison record, others to that controversial guitar with the flag, a gift he'd gotten from Dimebag Darrell of Pantera. Many insisted it was his lyrics, brutal, sometimes shocking, and always unfiltered. But insiders revealed a much darker truth. You see, Coe wasn't just overlooked. He was deliberately, systematically erased. Former Opry insiders tell a chilling story of a meeting, back in the late 1970s, where Coe confronted a powerful figure behind the scenes. Voices erupted, glass shattered, and when the dust settled, the verdict was brutal. He would never set foot on that stage again. Other rumors suggested he stumbled too close to scandals. Nashville wanted buried a shocking affair involving a rising female star and a powerful, married executive. Or maybe it was explosive financial documents hinting at rigged charts and dirty, under-the-table payouts that just mysteriously vanished after a studio break-in. Whatever the devastating truth was, the result was the same. Coe's name was wiped from Opry programs. Radio stations dropped his records. The award shows acted like he didn't even exist. Booking agents pulled out of contracts without a single explanation. Even the documentaries, the ones celebrating his peers, often pretended he was never there. This wasn't a rejection. It was a professional execution, without so much as a funeral. And yet, Coe's music never stopped. He stormed across the country, playing in rowdy bars, biker rallies, and outlaw festivals, places where his people, his true fans, welcomed him like a king. His concerts were explosive, sometimes dangerous, but they were always undeniably real. While Nashville's polished stars sang sanitized songs on television, Coe was on a stage somewhere, bleeding out every scar and every grudge for an audience that saw right through the industry's fake shine. The establishment wanted him invisible. Instead, he became a myth. To the suits in Nashville, he was a problem they couldn't solve. But to the people, he was a prophet. And the deeper Nashville tried to bury him, the stronger his stunning legend grew from the underground. The secrets he guarded, the evidence he saved. By the time David Allan Coe reached his 70s, the world assumed the war was over. Nashville had wiped his name from its history, and the Opry moved on, pretending he never existed. But Coe was a patient man. He'd survived reform schools, brutal prisons, and decades on the road. Silence was an old friend. What no one expected was that he had been keeping receipts the entire time. For years, Coe dropped chilling hints, speaking of knowledge that could ruin powerful men. He told friends about letters, haunting recordings, even photographs he kept locked away. Most dismissed these as the tall tales of a bitter outlaw. But in 2025, at 85 years old, the world finally discovered he wasn't bluffing. In a leaked recording, Coe spoke for nearly 2 hours. He was calm, deliberate, a cigarette in one hand, papers in the other. He didn't rant. He recited. He named the executives who blackballed him. He read from a yellowed, handwritten letter, allegedly from a former Opry board member, offering a stunning apology for being part of the machine that blacklisted you, even referencing a broken deal in 1981. Then, he played a scratchy voice memo. The voice was a now-deceased country star, warning him to stay quiet about a certain party involving industry elites, or risk ending up in the river like the others. Even more disturbing, Coe described walking backstage in 1977 and witnessing what he called a sickening transaction involving a minor and an Opry official. He admitted he never went to the police, terrified he would be silenced permanently. But he confided in two friends, one of whom later died under deeply suspicious circumstances in the early 2000s. For decades, Coe carried that devastating memory like a curse. Skeptics dismissed it all as fantasy, but for others, the pieces aligned with dark rumors Nashville had buried for years. And for the first time, Coe had documents to back it up. He claimed he had kept tapes, contracts, and photos hidden for his own protection. Evidence he never planned to unleash, unless they came for him. But now, with nothing left to lose, he decided to bring it all into the light, piece by devastating piece. What began as whispers of a bitter outlaw erupted into a storm, and Nashville, the city that believed it had buried Coe, was about to be dragged into a spotlight he had been saving for half a century. The leak and the firestorm that followed, the interview that unleashed decades of rage, was never meant to be public. It was filmed quietly on Coe's Tennessee property. Just him, a trusted journalist, and a small crew. It began as a casual conversation, but it soon spiraled into one of the most explosive confessions in country music history. For nearly 2 hours, David Allan Coe unloaded everything he had carried in silence. The names, the letters, the chilling threats, and the brutal betrayals that had shadowed his career. He spoke slowly, without theatrics, his voice calm but heavy with a stunning finality. At one point, he leaned into the microphone, his voice a low whisper. "You want to know why I was banned from the Opry? Because I knew too much. Because I wouldn't play their game. Because I caught one of their own doing something that would have destroyed them. And now," he said, "I'm done protecting them." The room fell silent after those words. There was no music, no editing, just the raw truth hanging in the air like a loaded weapon. That video was never meant to escape the room, but once it leaked online, it was unstoppable. Within days, TikTok clips of Coe's most shocking lines spread like wildfire. YouTube erupted with reaction videos. The internet erupted. Country music forums became battlegrounds, with fans dissecting every single word, demanding the truth. A new generation, who only knew Coe as a whispered legend, suddenly stormed the conversation. They wanted to know why this man's name had been buried for so long. The Nashville establishment was in a state of panic. The Opry released a meticulously crafted statement, a vague appeal to honoring tradition. They dismissed the accusations as unverified claims, but their silence was a deafening confession. Country radio? They acted like the story didn't even exist. The biggest stars, the pillars of the Opry, went completely silent. Not a single tweet, not one word in his defense. It felt like they were all holding their breath, waiting to see how far Coe would push it. But outside Nashville, the backlash was absolutely explosive. Hashtags like "Justice for Coe" and "Opry Exposed" went viral, a digital firestorm. Fans even materialized outside the Opry itself, holding defiant signs. Their cardboard signs asked the brutal questions, "Why not Coe?" and "The truth is Outlaw." Then, some of Coe's old outlaw brothers, men who'd fought the same wars behind closed doors, shattered decades of silence. One songwriter confessed he'd been threatened back in the 1980s, just for questioning the Opry's politics. A retired sound engineer revealed a shocking secret. There was a list, a blacklist of artists who were never allowed through those doors. For the very first time, Nashville couldn't bury David Allan Coe. He had simply outlived them. He had outlasted their games. And now, he had exposed them all. This was the reckoning. By the spring of 2025, at 85 years old, the storm David Allan Coe had unleashed had become a hurricane, bigger than even he could have imagined. The Grand Ole Opry, once an untouchable fortress, was suddenly on the defensive. Their PR teams worked around the clock. Longtime staff members were quietly dismissed. Whispers of internal investigations echoed through the city, swirled through the heart of Nashville. But it was too late. The damage was done. For the first time in its 100-year history, the Opry wasn't sacred anymore. It was compromised. And David Allan Coe, the very man they tried to erase, stood right at the explosive center of it all. His streaming numbers skyrocketed as a new wave of fans discovered devastating songs like The Ride and If That Ain't Country. His concerts, once held in the shadows at biker rallies, started selling out faster than they had in decades. Younger artists began to speak out, hailing his influence, calling him the one outlaw who had been telling the brutal truth all along. The very institution that tried to end him had instead resurrected him. But for Coe, this was never just about revenge. At 85, he knew his time on stage was running out. He wasn't chasing trophies or a last-minute induction. What he wanted was vindication. He needed to prove his absence from that stage wasn't about talent. It was about politics. It was about corruption. And it was about fear. As he said himself, in his own brutal words, "They tried to bury me without a funeral. Now I'm writing the eulogy for their reputation." In a way, it was a stunning, poetic justice. The boy rejected by his own stepmother, the one beaten in reform schools and locked away in brutal prisons, had lived long enough to see the very machine that tried to crush him begin to crumble. Nashville's gatekeepers, the ones who once held the absolute power to blacklist and bury careers, were now exposed in an age where the truth spreads like wildfire, faster than any carefully worded press release could ever contain it. From his Tennessee porch, surrounded by his guitars, his notebooks, and a lifetime of scars, David Allan Coe didn't need their stage anymore to prove who he was. His legacy was already etched into the lives of the outcasts, the ones who clung to his every word, in the generations of underground artists who studied his very soul. And now, in the reckoning that finally forced Nashville to look in a mirror it had shattered decades ago, the whisper of rejection had become a roar, had finally been shattered by the roar of his truth. David Allan Coe spent a lifetime being silenced, but in the end, his voice erupted, becoming the most powerful of all. After everything that's been revealed, do you think the Opry should finally acknowledge him, or was his true victory in exposing what happened behind closed doors? We want to know what you think in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more stories that dare to uncover the truth.